Hello, everybody. We are ready to get started. It's the top of the hour. I want to thank all of you for joining today, wherever you are in the world. We're so delighted to have you. My name is Jennifer Morris, and I'm with MadCap Software. And I am beyond thrilled to welcome Nita Beck, TechCom strategist, information architect, MadCap Flare consultant, owner of Nita Beck Communications, and one of the most active and helpful MadCap Flare community members out there. So today is all about lists, and whether you're very new to Flare or maybe you've been using it for years, you most likely will need to go beyond using simple numbered and bulleted lists. So today, Nita's going to demonstrate how to achieve custom list formats. Now, this presentation is adapted from her MadWorld 2019 presentation that took place a few months ago, and it was one of the most attended and talked about sessions. So folks, I saw people leaving this large session room, so this is for real. They left that large session room itching to give all of these new tips and tricks a go, which was really exciting to see. So welcome, Nita. Thank you so much for taking the time with all of us today. Now, as always, we've got a lot to cover, so I just have two quick items of business to cover before we jump in. First, reminder to everybody that this is going to be recorded. And so if you have to pop out early, not to worry, we'll send you a link to the recording and it will be available on our site. There is a question panel in the GoToWebinar console, so we'd encourage you, if you have any questions about what you're seeing or what's going on, drop in a question. We'll get to all of the, or not all of them, but as many as we can at the end, whatever time we have. But whatever we don't get to, we'll send out a document to everybody that registered with all of the questions and answers from the presentation today. So with that, I know we've got a lot to cover. Again, Nita, welcome. Thanks again for joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. I am so excited to be here, and I do have some butterflies in the stomach, so you'll all have to bear with me. All right, so I have some goals for this webinar, and they may sound contradictory. The first one is that I want to encourage you to use true HTML lists, so ordered lists and unordered lists, and even a third kind of list, to do your lists in Flare. But I also want to inspire you to create some custom CSS and some custom structures that act like lists, but technically aren't lists. So I have an ambitious agenda. I'm not going to read all of this right now, other than to say I'm going to try to get through 8 different ideas to share with you. So Jen, please help me keep on track during the hour. If you see I'm only on number 4 and I've got only 10 minutes to go, please yell at me. Okay, so I want, first of all, to talk about my philosophy or my practices as a Flare designer. I always, when I'm trying to craft something, I always try to seek the simplest solution. I firmly believe that the simplest solution is going to be the easiest to maintain. It's also going to be the easiest to teach a new team member how to use. So that's what I drive toward. I also try to seek a solution that requires as little author intervention as possible. And so with lists, of course, this could potentially be challenging. If somebody's trying to write, let's say, a step-by-step procedure, I want them to be able to focus on writing their content and not worrying about what styles they're selecting, because I think that kind of gets in the way. And then another design philosophy that I want to throw out here is that I also always document my solutions. And you'll see in some of my examples where I try to document the solutions that I'm going to share with you. All right, the first thing we'll talk about are some tricks that you can do for when you have lists that are nested inside other ordered lists. Before I go on, I do want to make mention of one thing. There is a demonstration Flare project that goes along with this presentation. MadCap will make it available to you along with the recording and my slide deck. So I don't want you to have to worry so much as you listen and watch to scribbling down all the CSS solutions that you see go by, because they are in that practice, in that demo project that you will get. All right, first let's talk about what happens in Flare by default when you nest ordered lists inside other ordered lists. So I notice if I create a nested ordered list inside other ordered lists, that Flare automatically numbers everything as 1. Obviously, I don't want everything to be 1. So how could I change that? I could change that by using Flare's user interface and going up to the home ribbon where I will find the controls for lists. And I could selectively have Flare set, let's say, the second level to be a lower alpha numbered list and the third level to be an upper alpha numbered list. I could make that happen through Flare's user interface. But what ends up happening is that we get inline formatting that way. So you'll see in this example, and by the way, I'm going to go off on a little aside here. Jen, please go ask the developers to try to help us parse all of this code so that we can see the nesting. But in any case, we can see that we have styles being applied here. This is inline formatting. And let's say, I'm going to go back a slide. Let's say someday in future, we want the second level not to be lowercase a, we want it to be uppercase A. I don't want to have to go through all of my lists in my project and change this inline formatting. That's kind of crazy. So instead, let's control that through CSS. So here is some CSS that I created that is in the practice project. And you'll see that I'm using what's called a complex selector. Let's look at the first example that says OL, OL, and then a second line that says UL, OL. What I'm saying in this custom CSS is that if ever I have an ordered list nested inside of an ordered list or an unordered list, I want the list style to be set to lowercase alpha or lower alpha. I have the third level list there where the list style is going to be upper alpha. The fourth list will be lower Roman. The fifth level will be upper Roman. And I could easily change what the list styles is for any of these levels at any, very easily through my style sheet. So notice no inline formatting. But yet this little list here, this little set of nested lists using this CSS will end up looking like that, what you see on the right there. And the author did not have to do anything other than nest the lists. And you could do that easily using the tab key. All right, so we can do a similar thing with unordered lists. I noticed that just straight out of the Flare box, if I have nested unordered lists, then I end up getting just bullets. Again, I could go to Flare's user interface. I could specify exactly what I wanted the second level to be and the third level to be. But again, I have inline formatting. So I want to avoid that inline formatting. So I've created some CSS for you. Here we have, if we have a first level unordered list that is nested inside an ordered list or an unordered list, I want it to be set as a circle. And if I have a third level nested, I want it to be set as a square. So again, doing all of that through CSS means that my author doesn't have to do much. My author can just has to worry about the nesting in order to achieve the styling that they want. I want to go back to the little comment that I said earlier on about documenting your solution. Notice in my examples here of CSS, I've added for you some commenting, telling you what this bit of CSS is intended to do. So when you get your hands on the practice project, open up the style sheet in the XML, not in the XML editor, in the internal text editor or in your favorite text editor, and you can see the comments that I've added there to help you understand how to use the CSS. All right, again, we have no inline formatting with those nested unordered lists. All right, some custom ordered lists and unordered lists. So the Flare user interface will allow one to create what's called a custom list format. I'm going to go backward quickly. Look look at the Flare user interface here on the left, and you'll see at the very bottom it says custom format. That is how you can start to design a custom list format, and later how you could select the custom list format to use with your lists. So this is, if we were going to just create a new one, this is the user interface that would come up. And Flare would allow us to give that custom list a name, and we can set up how we want the different levels to look, whether we want them to be bulleted lists, on circle lists, square lists, whether we want lowercase alpha, uppercase alpha, etc. I will use this technique when I'm trying to jumpstart some custom list CSS that I want to design. So for one of my clients, I had to create a very complicated custom list format that I referred to as a mil-spec style ordered list. For those of you who really do work to mil-spec, if my example, if you're laughing up your sleeve at me, I hope you don't. It's been a long time since I've worked on mil-spec, but what I was trying to do is achieve a very unusual type of ordered list that I cannot get just straight out of the box. Let me go ahead a slide or two to show you what this looks like. Notice that the first level of this ordered list is a lowercase alpha instead of a number 1. The second level is Arabic 1. The third level is parens lowercase letter. So it was a very unusual numbering scheme. And additionally, it was an unusual alignment. Notice that step A and step B, instead of having the text line up under the text, it wraps all the way to the left margin. And this particular thing, we were going to be doing a 2-column PDF output, and so this is how the procedures would end up looking in a PDF. So if I can go backward now to my CSS, what I did here is I used Flare's user interface to originally create the levels I wanted and to give the ordered list a name, which I called the mil-spec list. And Flare then created all of this CSS under the hood. I was able to then go back into the style sheet through the text editor, and I could really manipulate different things that I needed it to do, such as the margins and the indenting and things like that. But this was a very quick way for me to create something pretty complex, which then my authors would only have to select from Flare's user interface in order to then apply this step. They would just have to select it once, and then they can go. And depending upon the nesting of the steps, Flare would take care of all the numbering for them. Okay, I do want to make note of one thing about this. Per Flare's documentation, custom lists, you can tell I'm tired. Custom lists are supported only for PDF output. And I think that's, I don't really know why that is. It might be some kind of CSS3 limitation, I don't know. But I still use that custom list functionality if I want to generate some special custom lists with different levels. And I play around a lot, I test, I adjust, I test, I adjust, and then I can just enjoy using that from then on. Now I'm going to swing back to custom lists a little later in the presentation. All right, the third type of thing. There's something called a definition list in HTML and in CSS. A definition list, the structure in HTML is that you have a tag called a DL for definition list, and inside that definition list you have a definition term, and then you have the definition. This kind of structure can have any other things in it, but I want to keep it simple and just talk about these 3 tags. So a definition list in Flare is something that actually you have to craft by hand, because Flare's user interface, where it has that drop down with all the different types of lists, it does not include a definition list. Jen, please take this down as another feature request, and it's one that I've asked for a long time. But in any case, we can craft a definition list by hand in the text editor, and once we have it in the text editor, we can see that in the XML editor, Flare actually knows how to parse that HTML. It knows that we have, I know you can't see my, can you see my cursor? You probably can't see my cursor.
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, you can, wonderful.
Yes.
So you can see we have a DL structure bar, and we have the DT and we have the DD structure bar. So Flare knows how to interpret this HTML. And actually, you don't even have to do anything in your CSS to get it to lay out like this, because this is standard CSS. So how do you actually achieve this in Flare? If we go to this Flare's style sheet editor, and you look at lists, you'll actually see these things listed there. And so you can then do some additional styling. Maybe you want the definition term to be italic. Maybe you want the definition term to be bold. You can style additional CSS as you want for those tags. For those classes. But one thing that's different is that as you said a moment ago, there's nothing in Flare's user interface that says, let me enter a definition list. You have to do it by hand. So I have a little trick. I create a snippet, and inside that snippet, I have coded the definition list by hand with some placeholder content in it. And then I make sure that I turn on Flare's auto suggestions for snippets. If you've never used auto suggestions before, you can write this down, go to the File menu, select Options in the lower right corner of the File menu, and then on the Suggestions, or maybe it's called Auto Suggestions tab, you can set up certain options to tell Flare you want it to suggest snippets to you, so that as you start to type something, if there's a snippet that matches what you've started to type, Flare will prompt you. Then you can insert that snippet, immediately convert it to text, and then you can edit. All right, I'm going to get a sip of water while you watch this play out. Now I'm going to convert it to text. And now I can edit it the way I need it to read. So this is a quick tip for how you can quickly insert a definition list, even though Flare's user interface doesn't give you the way to do that directly through the list options. All right, moving on. So what are some common uses for definition lists? I've seen some clients who have used it for their glossary of terms. They've used it as an alternative to Flare's glossary functionality. I also have seen people use it for API documentation for, let's say, a list of parameters or arguments. Here's a screenshot from a project that I've done for a client, and you can see we have these set up as definition lists. And for the definition term, we customize the CSS so that it puts the definition term in a code font, a monospace font, instead of in the font that we use for narrative. Now, I want to say one more thing about definition lists, and that is how they compare to tables. And this is specifically for those of you who are doing API documentation. I see a lot of API documentation done as tables. And I would advocate that you should instead do them as definition lists for the following reasons. You don't need to worry about the borders and how a table might break across pages if you're doing print output. And another thing you don't have to worry about is, what if you have, let's say, one of these parameters is going to appear in multiple topics. That's a perfect opportunity to snippetize that item. It's kind of hard to snippetize a table row. People have tried it, and I don't know that anybody's really found the successful secret sauce yet for making that happen. But you can easily snippetize your definition lists. All right, if you want to learn more about definition lists, the Mozilla Developers Network has stuff, and you could also check out the W3 schools. There's lots of examples there. All right, number 4, paragraph classes that act like ordered lists. All right, paragraph classes that act like ordered lists but really aren't. There are some advantages to doing these, and that is that one could say that you have total control over the numbering scheme. Although I did just demonstrate how you could get total control over the numbering scheme with real ordered lists, but I'm just sharing this is what one of the advantages is that users who advocate paragraph classes like this will make. But another real advantage is that you can point a cross-reference from one step in an ordered list to a bookmark paragraph in the same, I shouldn't call it an ordered list because it's not, in the same list-like thing. So let's say you have steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and in step 4, you want to point the user back to step 2. You can do that if you're using paragraph classes that use Flare auto numbering, because you could set up a cross-reference format that will pick up that auto number. For me, there's a major disadvantage to this, however, and that is I think that the Flare author has to do a lot of stylizing while they're in the process of writing. And I think that that is distracting from the writing process. So I advocate, again, so this sort of violates my principle of an easy to implement solution. Anyways, but I'm still going to demonstrate how you could do this. So I crafted some CSS for those users who would like to use paragraphs that act like ordered lists. So I created a paragraph style called step, and another one called step reset. Let's just look at step for a moment. Just ignore the fact that it says step reset here for the time being. But for the paragraph step, I'm going to have it have the word step, then a space, and then it's going to be an incrementing counter, just using a simple number counter. For the reset paragraph, I'm going to say, I want the reset paragraph to reset that number always to 1. I also created a substep that has the number just be, it's going to be a lowercase alpha, and it's going to increment. And I have a paragraph substep reset that resets that to whatever is the first in that counter. So it's going to reset it to 1, which is actually A, lowercase a. So you know, I also created a couple other things here. These are some generic classes, so that if you had something you wanted to nest at, let's say you have something you want to have nested after a step and you want to make sure that it aligns with the step. So I've got a left margin that matches the left margin that I've put on the step classes, for example. That's what those things are for. I just realized I violated my document your solution. I don't have any comments on this. I should go back and add that for you. So how will this look both in the XML editor and then in output? So in the XML editor, this sure looks like a list with a sublist, but these are all paragraph class or paragraph blocks of those paragraph classes that I just created. I also have a bookmark that I've put at one of the steps so that I could add a cross-reference to that step. And in the output, we see it comes out looking just exactly the way we want it to look. So I want to give a shout out to another member of the Greater Flare community, and that's a gal named D. Vincent Day. She's in UK, and she was a guest blogger for the Mad blog several months back. She did at least 2 articles, maybe there's even a third, on auto numbering using paragraph classes. So I wanted to highlight her and send you her way so you can get more ideas from her. All right, we're up to number 5, and I'm checking the time. I think I'm doing pretty well. All right, tables with auto-numbered rows. And I'm going to share 2 examples with you. So in my experience as a tech writer, and I've been a tech writer now for 38 years, and still loving my job, by the way. I remember at times I needed to create something called a step action result table. Maybe this was in a troubleshooting guide. I don't know. Maybe it was an installation guide. And what I'm trying to achieve here, and I set myself this design challenge before MadWorld to figure this one out. I said, how could I create some CSS and a table so that the table rows would automatically number? So that if I inserted a row mid-table, Flare would take care of in making sure that that row had a number, and it would also renumber everything that followed that row. So I came up with 2 solutions in this first example. The second one here shows that I have major steps and I have sub-steps. So I'll show you the CSS in a moment, but what I did for this is I created the CSS. I also created a table style sheet, and then I set up little, what I call starter snippets that had little placeholder tables with some rows already set up so that I could just drop that snippet in place where I wanted to use that, to have that kind of table, convert it to text, and then begin to edit. So let's take a look at the CSS. So to achieve this, I only have 4 classes, and these are paragraph classes. So I've called this table 1 step number. It's table 1 because I have 2 table style sheet samples in the demo project. So I want you to know this one goes with table 1. So I have step number, and step number is just an incrementing counter. I did give it a name. I had to name this counter, so I named it N, short for number. I have a step number reset, which makes sure that it starts at 1. I have a sub-step letter, which I identified with as capital L, and I said this is just going to be a lowercase alpha, and it will increment, and I have the sub-step letter reset that will reset it to 1. So going back to my example here, I do have to make sure that the step 1 right here is, there's a paragraph inside this cell, and I have to make sure that that paragraph is set to the step number reset so that it starts at 1. Same thing with this one. And then in this one with the sub-steps, I have to make sure that this one starts with sub-step letter 1, no, it's reset, and that this one is sub-step letter reset. So that's the only additional fiddling I have to do with the numbering scheme. This is why I create a snippet so that I can just drop it in place and go. So that's the CSS. So then I created a table style sheet. In the table style sheet, I can control borders, background colors, widths, all those kind of things. But the important thing is that I created some column types. So I have a column for the step column. I have a column for the sub-step column, and then everything else is other. And I'm even controlling the width in those columns so that I want to conserve and use as little space as possible for the numbers, just so that I can maximize how much space I have for the content of the other columns. All right, whole bunch of junk there. I don't want you to read all that. You can read that later. But generally what this says is just create a starter snippet that has everything in place, drop it in place. So I'm going to skip all that junk so you can read that on your own later, to follow the steps, to create the CSS, the table style sheet, create your starter snippet, and then you can go. Now I have a second example. What about if you want to number your step rows a little differently? So here I have the numbers are number dot number, which increment depending on the step number. I do have some specific CSS styles for this setup, and I have a specific table style sheet. This is probably table style sheet 2. So you can go into the demo project and you can study what I've done there. And maybe this is more like the kind of step action result table you would be interested in using. All right. Cross references to step list items in ordered lists. Now, before I go on, you remember, I hope I said a short while ago that it's not possible when you're using a true ordered list to put a cross reference from one, let's say you're writing a step-by-step procedure, from one step to another step. Well, it turns out it is possible. We're going to create some special CSS. So I created some CSS for you called ordered, whoops, my mouse is too sensitive, called ordered list step number. And then I set up a complex selector that said, if we have a list item inside the step number ordered list, I want its list style type to be none. I don't want it to be alpha, lower alpha, upper alpha, Arabic. I want it to be none, because then I'm going to set up an auto number format to control that step number. So here I'm saying I want this step number to be an incrementing number. I also set up some additional CSS that says, and by the way, the first list item inside the step number ordered list, I want to reset to 1. I did some other fancy stuff here. I'm going to format that step number. I'm going to use a class that I created. It's a span class that I call step number. I want it to be red and bold. Notice I'm not putting any formatting inside this part of my CSS. I'm controlling the formatting by using a class, and it's a span class. So let's see how that looks. All right. Well, I have step-by-step procedure where I've controlling the auto number, having it be red, bold, step, and then a number. And look, because these are auto numbers, I was able to add a add a bookmark in one of those steps so that I can then add a cross reference to that bookmark. Here's how it looks in the XML editor, and here's how it looks in output. So for years, I thought I could not use cross references inside a step-by-step procedure to some other step in the same procedure, or even another procedure. But here's how you can do it. And look, there's no inline formatting at all. So we're applying the class. MadCap is applying the numbers. I've got a bookmark, and then I'm cross-referencing to that bookmark. All right. Moving on. All right, some Flare tricks, some user interface tricks for quickly writing ordered and unordered lists. Let's see. So I want to advocate strongly that you practice creating lists without using the mouse, except perhaps to start the list, because you have to go up to the home ribbon and tell Flare, I want to start a numbered list, or I want to start a bulleted list, or I want to start a custom list if you set one of those up. But once you have that list started, you can then use 4 different keyboard keystrokes to craft that list. To create the next block, you use Enter. To indent a list item so it becomes a nested list inside the higher level list, you use Tab. If you want to create some paragraphs inside a list item, which I strongly advocate you do when you want to do things like adding a note after the step instruction, or maybe adding a paragraph with a screenshot in it, use the shortcut Control semicolon. And then when you want to outdent, you're going to use Shift Tab. So I have another little movie for you here. And I've actually tried to describe what I'm doing. So I'm writing some text, I'm going to press Enter, and then I'm going to press Tab. And that nested it again. I'm writing some more text, and then I'm going to use that Control semicolon so that I get some paragraphs. Now I have a paragraph inside this list item. And let's say in this paragraph is where I'd put a picture or a note or something like that. Now I want to outdent. So I'm going to use Shift Tab. I should have just said to outdent. And then I'm going to press Enter again. Now I'm going to Shift Tab again a couple of times because I'm outdenting as I set up the levels I want to work with. I quipped at MadWorld that I actually had to record this movie several times because I kept mistyping certain words, and I knew it wouldn't fly. So now let's imagine this last bit, I don't want to be part of the list at all. So I'm going to Shift Tab to outdent it. So I just did everything here without using the mouse, except to start the list. So with step number 1. So I encourage you to use keyboard shortcuts. Now I've extended this idea by creating 2 additional custom keyboard shortcuts that are not in the Flare user interface. And that is, I created Control-Shift-1, which would be my way to start a numbered list, an ordered list, and Control-Shift-8 in order to start an unordered list or a bullet list. The reason I use the number 8 is because if you look at a keyboard, Shift 8 is the asterisk key, or the asterisk character. An asterisk is a convention used in Markdown for creating a bulleted list, for designating a list item in a bulleted list. And so I like that little mnemonic. So if you've never set up custom keyboard shortcuts, let me tell you where to find this. You will go to Flare's File menu. Down in the right corner, you'll find Options to open. So open the Options dialog, and then you will see a keyboard shortcut tab. You'll want to make sure that you are setting things up for the XML editor rather than the whole user interface. These are XML editor specific keyboard shortcuts. All right, last item. Oh, we're gonna have plenty of time. All right, list item snippets. So a question that I see come up on the MadCap user forums, where I'm a moderator and a frequent responder to questions, is that people want to use snippets for list items so that they can reuse those list items in different places. And they struggle with trying to figure out exactly how to get the bullets to work correctly or the numbers to work correctly. So I've got a couple examples here, and these examples are in the demo project. So notice at the left, I have a snippet that I set up, and this is content that I intend to use inside lists of any sort. Doesn't matter if it's an ordered list or an unordered list. Notice that I've put it inside a paragraph. It's not in a list item. It's just in a paragraph. I then can drop that snippet into a list. In this case, I have an ordered list where I've dropped it in as what's called a snippet block, which means it's going to retain whatever the formatting it has inside of it, inside of the snippet. And I want you to notice that the bullet looks like it's way in the wrong place. That's only in the XML editor. This is just a quirk of the XML editor, and you need to just, live with this and know that it's all going to work out fine in your output. So here is, yeah, so trust me, I guess I don't have what it's going to look like in output, but just trust me that it will look okay. So here's the same snippet, and in this case, I put the same snippet inside an ordered list, and I dropped it in this case, as snippet text, and we can see that it's part of step 3. It's in the first paragraph in the third list item, and then I have some live text underneath it. And Flare is taking care of the numbering just fine. And actually, this is an interesting quirk, and the positioning of the number looks fine in this case because I've used a snippet text rather than snippet block. Well, what if you want to have more than one thing in your snippet, more than one list item in your snippet, and you want to be able to use those steps, those list items, in different lists in different places, and you want the numbers to come out right? So I set a snippet up in this case, and here I do have these items set up as list items, but notice that there's no containing OL or UL parent tag to contain them. They're just kind of hanging out by themselves. I mean, this is not valid HTML, but Flare will know what to do with it when it processes it. So in this case, I've used it in an ordered list. I have the first list item. I have entered then the snippet block, and notice I don't have that snippet block inside a list item. I just dragged it in by itself, followed by another list item that is live to this topic, and all the numbers are clearly not right. But look what Flare does in output. Flare figures it out. So it will take care of all that numbering for you. So I just wanted to demonstrate these things and to let you know I've got samples in my demo project that you can play with so that you can see how these structures work. As I say, these seem to be a holy grail of some users trying to figure out how can I get my list snippets to work correctly, and I hope that that's enough of a demo. All right, we've actually got 15 minutes. I can't believe I went through really, really fast.
Wonderful. Well,
all right.
Thank you, Nita. That was great. And good job staying on task, on time. It's okay. So we do have the questions panel open. If anybody has questions on what was presented today, I would encourage you to jot them in there. I have a couple of slides. A few things are coming in, and we'll get to those in a second, so feel free to jot any questions down. Reminder that we will be making this project available. So I know I found myself scribbling, but then I remembered we have it. So not to worry, we will get you these code samples and everything so you have them to use and customize going forward. But a couple of things I wanted to just remind everybody about before we get to the questions. I think we've got another slide. Thank you. So just as a reminder, you have until June 30th. We will be hosting our MadWorld conference in Dublin, Ireland, coming up October 8th through the 11th. So if you haven't registered, you have until June 30th, which is the end of this week, to save up to $700 on that registration. So it's a great way to save a few bucks. And if you haven't signed up, we hope you will join us, particularly if you're on the right coast here in North America, or perhaps joining us from Europe. You can pop up there. And then we've just announced MadWorld 2020. And so it's going to be held in Austin, Texas next year. And it's going to be September 20th through the 23rd. So it's going to be at the Fairmont in Austin. So it is on our website, but just letting everybody know that's the date and the location for MadWorld in 2020. We're going to do one in North America next year. So there'll be more details, of course, as everything comes together. All right, so let's turn to the questions a little bit. Again, if you have any questions, everyone, feel free to jot them down. So one question I wanted to ask, so you talked a little bit about the DLs, those definition lists, and you know versus tables, and you talked about that. Can you talk a little bit about what was the impetus of using that versus a glossary for your one client?
That had to do, that was a decision of the client. The client, this was with API documentation, so they were already using definition lists for their parameter definitions on their API pages, but they also had a glossary of terms, and they had set that glossary of terms up already as definition lists, and we made the decision that they would work for how they wanted them to be output, that they would end up that we didn't really need to redo them as in the box Flare glossary terms in order to achieve what they wanted to do. So, you know, I didn't try to design a solution for them that wasn't necessary.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Sounds like it was client driven.
It was client driven, and they weren't doing glossary pop-ups, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, that wasn't one of their requirements.
Gotcha. And then another, it's kind of more of a comment, or perhaps to revisit, not so much a question, but the comment came in when you were talking about cross-referencing, that the cross-reference needs to be auto-formatted to pull the step number when compiled, just in case the step number changes later. So I'm not sure if that was mentioned, or perhaps that's something you can comment on. But again, the comment was about the cross-reference needing to have the auto number format.
So right here is the cross-reference format down here at the bottom. You see the cross-reference format is going to give us the word step, and then it's going to give us the auto number only. So I'm having it give us the word step. Actually, that doesn't quite match my example I'm seeing. Actually, that's a disconnect between my slides and the project. I should have this be capital S in the project. But, you know, Flare will automatically take care of will automatically calculate the number that is supposed to be there in the output. Does that answer your question, Jen?
I think so. I think it was just more of a comment from one of the folks that was on to clarify that. So that was great. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and I'll keep this open for just a little bit. If anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to jot them into that questions panel. And if not, we just want to thank everybody for joining. Nita, this was so helpful. Thanks for taking the time to present to everyone. And I know everybody's looking forward. Looking forward to getting your project and trying everything.
I'm just sorry I went so fast. I hope that wasn't too fast.
I think it was great. And we'll all have the project and the notes to try on our own too. So with that, I just want to thank you again. Thank everybody for joining us today. And we'll be compiling everything and sending an email out to all that have registered with the recording, the projects, the slides. So you'll have it all to try on your own. So thanks again, everybody, for joining. Thank you again, Nita, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week. We'll see you on the next presentation.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.